Right.
Are you happy for me to record?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, by all means.
Uh, Fantastic. Cool. So yeah, I guess firstly, like what sort of big changes have you been seeing in the tourism industry off the back of the conflict in the Middle East?
Right. The first is sort of an instability in the markets, right? But that's happened in just about any economic activity.
Sure.
But one thing to remember, and I guess I realize, Mark, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? But you know this already. But just in case your readers or our viewers, or whatever the case, they may not know, tourism is sort of one of the few what we call transversal economic activities, meaning that a change in overall economic outlook impacts tourism and vice versa. So, right, if there's a change in tourism, especially in a country like Vietnam, where we have closer of 9 to 10% of its GDP, it's tourism related. So
Mm.
it's a big deal. So the first one that we saw was sort of an instability in capital, right? So you have, as you know, a variety of projects that are underway in Vietnam when it comes to hotel construction, hotel planning, and so forth. And so it may put capital on hold or it may spur capital. That's the first one. The second has to do with the fact that Vietnam is energy dependent, right? As you know,
Sure.
but that impacts Vietnam's tourism industry two ways. First, it may make long haul flights more expensive, and thus we may see a contraction in demand for Vietnam tourism from further away destinations. We haven't seen, and again, I've been sort of following this, we haven't really seen anything major um, so far. I haven't seen anything major. That being said, we are seeing sort of a contraction when it comes to domestic tourism. So what most countries have been doing is sort of to invest a little bit more in nearby destinations. In the case of Vietnam, the usual suspects, right? You have China, you have South Korea, you have now India as sort of the main emitting markets towards Vietnam. Those are not going to be massively impacted by whatever oil pressures we may see in the near future. But we are seeing some caution from Vietnamese authorities, I think, in regard to energy and fuel conservation, right? No one really knows how long this will take. And of course, again, the Strait of Hormuz isn't the only way to get energy and oil into Vietnam. There's a variety of others, but we are seeing some caution. That's the main thing that I've noticed, right? People aren't so bullish when it comes to investment. Um, the second is that we may see a slight retraction, for example, from European tourism for the exact same reasons. So
Sure.
markets, say, from Northern Europe, France, Germany, they may retract slightly, not just towards Vietnam, but towards that whole Southeast Asia region. And third, Vietnam's tourism industry is fairly dependent on a variety of end user products that are not manufactured in Vietnam. I'm talking, for example, about hardware that Vietnam imports, even some things as furniture that is specific to the hotel industry. And those products may
Mm.
see an increase in their price due to the current events in the Strait of Hormuz. I haven't seen anything major yet. Now, on the very positive side, and again, Mark, preaching to the choir, because I follow you, so I'm telling you something that you told me. Vietnam sort of bamboo. I follow the-shiv religiously. Vietnam's bamboo diplomacy has, in all effects, assured that Vietnam will not feel the impacts of an oil recession more so than other countries, right? Vietnam's relationships with Russia, Vietnam's relationships with the United States and with China basically ensured that while constrained, there will be a steady supply of energy, meaning oil, towards Vietnam. Now, where that will go, I think it's sort of up for debate, up for discussion. But I really have not seen any major dramatic impacts insofar as the Vietnamese industry is concerned.
I guess what I wonder about is jet fuel prices, and I think that Vietjet and Vietnam
Right.
Airlines, I mean, they bring a lot of tourists into
They do.
Vietnam.
They do.
I would argue, I think that's probably one of their sort of key
Probably the
functions.
most visible for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so therefore, I wonder, do you think that like jet fuel prices increasing, if they can't run as many flights, we're going to see a contraction?
That's a great question. Now, I've only seen one or two airlines. One of them was Delta, the other was Lufthansa. Actually, publicly announced that they are reducing the number of flights. Um,
Mm,
Airlines are incredibly cautious about doing so because they know that losing any market share in the short term, for whatever reasons, plausible as they may be, will in all likelihood ensure a longer term loss in market share. Um, so I think they may be cautious. They may think, hey, how long is this actually going to last? Because there are other ways of moving oil around the world. And again, one thing to recall is that most countries where these airlines are based, they have vast reservoirs of oil, right? So
mm,
you may see countries dip into those reserves or contact strategic partners in the Middle East to release a few more million barrels of oil to face these short-term pressures. Now, are we still going to see 4 and 5 flights every day within the same destination? Maybe not. But the crucial flights, I think they will remain. I've yet to see, other than those two examples I cited, um, any flagship carriers announcing in public that they are cutting flight frequency. Again, because that carries a series of marketing and market share implications. Insofar as Vietnam specifically is concerned, again, Vietnam is quite clever when it comes to energy production and consumption. They have huge reserves of crude. And while Vietjet is a private company, both Vietnam Airlines and Vietjet do have the possibility to tap into those reserves. So I don't see anything major occurring in the next, I'd say, couple of months. Now, should this instability increase or should it expand to other areas of the globe, then maybe you'll see. But I
sure.
think that will come from a government directive, almost certainly.
Okay. And so do you see a difference then between low end and high end travelers? Uh,
We do actually. We are seeing that as almost always the higher end travels, the luxury travel is almost immune to economic shocks. And so far, these shocks have been fairly mild in the grand scheme of things. If we look at the number, frequency, and magnitude of economic crisis since World War II, this one is fairly benign, right? Uh,
sure.
with with a lot of quotation marks around it, right? This isn't the 1973 OPEC oil shock, right? That just stopped the world. But we are seeing almost no change in the upper end of the market, and we are seeing a geographic contraction at the low end of the market. Meaning, are people still traveling? Yes. And again, once more, preaching to the choir. But whenever there's less money or less discretionary income, people don't stop traveling. They just travel to other places, or they will travel with lesser frequency. What typically happens, and we're seeing a little bit of that uh, thus far, is that people will tend to extend their holiday. Instead of taking multiple trips during the year, they will take fewer trips but longer ones because that's more cost effective. So, for example, instead of me going to Quy Nhon, Hoi An, Hanoi, Da Nang within the same 6 months, I might just go to Hoi An and Da Nang and just stay a little bit longer because one of the big costs of the trip would be transportation. So if that transportation increases, I might as well stay maybe a couple more days in the destination and still enjoy, I don't know, the 15 days, 20 days of vacation days that I have in a year. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, 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 totally. I went in. So I guess we're sort of talking about the increased fuel costs. I'm thinking consumer spending falling off as a result of
Mm,
inflation in more developed markets. So I kind of get what you're saying. Like people are staying in one place for longer rather
mm.
than and using transport a lot less. But I'm also thinking they'd be spending less simply because prices
Probably,
are going up.
probably. Tourism and travel is one of those fascinating products,
Hmm.
and it appears it is absolutely it's a non-essential product, right? You don't need to buy it to survive. It's not like paying rent or buying milk or groceries or anything like that. But there is something called the tourism leisure paradox. And so it appears that if you are, the more seasoned you become as a traveler, the more important travel and tourism becomes in your overall spending habits. So it's very rare to see people stopping travel altogether. And we've been studying this, I don't know, 30 years or something, and no one really knows how to explain this. But the fact of the matter is, you will still travel. Now, will it be, you pile all the kids in the car and off you go to see the grandparents, or you will take shorter haul flights to just one destination and stay there in a nice bed and breakfast that's not so expensive? We don't really know, but people will still continue to travel. Every single economic shock that we've had since 1952 until the present has shown evidence of this, with the big exception being COVID. But the borders were closed and movement was actually restricted. So when absent of those events, say a pandemic, when movement is actually restricted, you will still see travel. It is the nature and type of that travel that we are seeing changes in, and that's really, really interesting. I'm not quite sure in Vietnam, given that so many families use diesel as part of their means of energy to fuel their transportation. I'm not sure how that's going to be impacted. I've seen prices increase slightly in Vietnam. We've seen, obviously, long lines to fill our motorbikes at the gas station, but I haven't really seen, at least looking at the latest statistics, a drastic reduction in the number of domestic trips taken by Vietnamese, and that's the majority of the market. So I think there's sort of a cautious approach to how long this crisis will last and how its impacts will be. But again, just sort of to drive the point further, people will still continue to travel.
Sure.
It's more the nature of that travel that we're kind of seeing, we're expecting to see how it's going to change.
Sure. And so I wonder, from a human resources perspective, then, you were sort of training a lot of these kids who are now working in the industry.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you're sort of like what they're kind of saying. Are you sort of hearing that, are they struggling? Are they fine? Are they worried?
It's so interesting because I found so many parallels. I'm in Denmark now, and
Sure.
you would think that it'd be a completely different system, and in some cases it is. But when it comes to human resources, there's a lot of the same issues, where you have a large pool of young people, very talented, very bright, who go into the industry very starry-eyed, and once they look at prospective salaries upon entry, or they see how difficult the first 2 years are, they say, "Oh, well, hang on a second. Maybe I can do something else." So in Vietnam, we have a huge pool of talent, but only a small percentage stays in the industry 2 years post-graduation.
Really?
I am looking very closely at the educational market and when it comes to tourism and hospitality, and we're seeing now almost a doubling in offer in the last 5 years from Vietnamese educational institutes. So both countries have a very strong tradition when it comes to vocational training. So for example, you are finishing your high school, and instead of going to your traditional 3 or 4 or 5 year university degree, you may want to get a 2 or 3 year degree that's closely intertwined with industry and basically guarantees you a job at the end of that training. What we would call, Mark, let's see, I'm not sure if you have those in Australia, but like an associate's degree. Is that something? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it'd be around 2 years. Same thing here as in Denmark. And so you have a lot of young people entering the industry, but the salaries are still not competitive. Same as Vietnam.
Yeah. Sorry, I just on that. Go on, keep going. Sorry.
Go, please go.
No. I was just going to say, just on that, the salaries are not competitive. I was wondering about that. You're a teacher at RMIT. RMIT is quite expensive.
Very much so.
I wonder, like, a lot of those kids getting out of that degree, if they would be able to find positions in hospitality that pay enough to make it worthwhile.
It depends. It depends on what type of positions. It depends which area within tourism and hospitality they're focusing on. So
Sure.
With tourism being this massive umbrella, right? But for example, students who are interested in finance within the hospitality realm, hospitality analytics. Those have no shortage of well-paid jobs because,
Okay,
as you
yeah.
know, the pipeline for middle and upper management when it comes to those areas is still small in Vietnam, right? We still import a lot of foreigners to train Vietnamese workforce. When it comes to food and beverage, that tends to absorb the majority of the graduates, then salaries are still very, very small. And so that's what you see, no matter how passionate students may be, within 2 years with such a heavy workload and low pay, a lot of them exit the industry and they take those skills that they've learned in tourism and hospitality, namely customer service skills, analysis skills, and they will transfer them to another industry. The greatest
Sure.
absorption tends to be either marketing or real estate, where they can make, in some cases, twice or triple what they can make in tourism and hospitality. And no difference in Denmark. It is exactly the same thing when it comes
Sure.
to the student population.
Sure. That makes sense. Because yeah, I just wonder. I know as far as the tourism products, my limited experience. I mean, I know there's the high end there, obviously in Vietnam, but I feel like most of it is probably lower end, lower to mid sort of, and
It
hotels and
really depends,
things.
Mark. It
Mm,
really depends. So the difference in the markets is the Vietnam is very much a country in its growth stages. Right? If you look at
sure.
Butler's model, Vietnam is still an emerging tourism destination, whereas Denmark is very much a mature destination. So
Mm,
Vietnam up until now is sort of bet on growth, whereas Denmark is sort of bet on value, right? They tried, while they get fewer tourists, they tried to extract as much value from those tourists as possible, whereas Vietnam's bet still has been on numbers, on growth, especially when of international tourists. Um, and so, because the market is much wider in Vietnam, you have the whole gamut, right? You have the very, very, very high end of luxury where they pay extremely well. You have the highline international hospitality corporations that are putting their footprint in Vietnam and driving standards. In there, yes, the salaries are very competitive. That being said, between 70 and 75% of hospitality in Vietnam are still family-owned SMEs. In there, then salaries are
mm,
extremely low, right? And typically, you have small family affairs that are run, by an entire or a couple of families together. And there, for a young person who has just gotten a highly specialized degree from a university, naturally they're going to feel, I can do more than this, right? And so they
sure.
will they will move to other areas and to other places for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, man. Look, that's plenty for me. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Maybe a couple of things. Just the comparison
Sure.
is really interesting,
Sure.
between Denmark and Vietnam. And so, just to give you a couple of figures, so
Mm,
Denmark's tourism footprint is less than 2% of its GDP. The latest figures from 2025 are 1.8%. For Vietnam, it's closer to 10%. So it's 9.7. This is according to the United Nations World Tourism Organization. So completely different stories, right? For Vietnam, tourism is a strategic sector of the economy. For Denmark, less so. We've already spoken about workforce and especially industry needs at the entry level. It's at the management level that's really interesting. Uh, Denmark has no shortage of competent and highly educated hospitality managers at the very high end
mm,
with strong analytical skills. Vietnam needs a couple more years to get there. And what they've typically done is they have imported foreign managers who then train the workforce. But now, again, just to touch base on the last point, in the last 5 years, you now have lots of Vietnamese universities who are now forming what's going to be the new generation of hotel managers,
mm,
especially in the high-end international chains that have a significant footprint in Vietnam. It used to be that the general manager in most high-end hotels, 5 stars, 4 stars and above, oftentimes was not a Vietnamese, but now it is. And I
mm,
think that tendency is likely to increase. Yet it is still very difficult to convince a young person to stay in the industry after finishing their degree and entering the hospitality industry in Denmark, just as it is in Vietnam. Now, the vocational pathway is perhaps a little bit more developed. They follow something similar to the German model, meaning that you do a succession of internships throughout your degree. So, for example, you may study 3 days a week, and the other 2 days you are working at that company that in all likelihood is going to absorb you once your degree is completed. That's very, very good. Perhaps something to look at. The most interesting one is the approach and attitude towards sustainability. That remains, unfortunately, the Achilles heel of the Vietnamese tourism industry.
Sure.
And we have spoken, I think everyone has spoken to this at such great length, right? I'm not going to say anything particularly new, maybe just a couple of minutes on a comparison. You think, oh, it'll only change when mentalities will change or when culture change. Look at the Nordic countries. I'm like, oh, hang on there, buddy. It's a little bit, it's more complicated and it's simpler than this. The reason why things changed here is because it's part of the law. You cannot not be sustainable.
Sure.
It's not a matter of we all think sustainably and everyone's going to recycle because they think it's important for the planet. Let's be realistic. People are going to recycle because if you don't, there's incredibly hefty fines if you don't. And the same thing for sustainability practices within the hotel industry. And Denmark had maybe 30 years to implement these sustainability practices. Yes, there was a consensus around it. There was an initial stage where rather than punitive, such measures were designed to reward. For example, if you did recycle, if you did implement sustainability practices in your hotel, you'd get a reward, namely a taxation break. But after a while, once more or less the system was in place, well, you kind of have to be sustainable, because if you're not, it's going to cost you money. And I'm wondering if Vietnam may want to take a look at examples such in Denmark and think about it. I like to say that Vietnam is legislation light and bureaucracy heavy. Denmark is the opposite. Denmark is bureaucracy light but legislation heavy. And when it comes to tourism and hospitality and sustainability practices within tourism and hospitality, that's a perfect example, right? The law is very clear, but it's there. And if you don't follow it, then there's a huge penalty, right? So there's every interest in the world for Danish hotel and tourism managers to follow those practices. What they've done very cleverly, they've sort of turned it into one of their marketing strong points, right? So they've collaborated with the Danish DMOs, namely the three big ones, Wonderful Copenhagen, Visit Denmark, and Discover Denmark, and they said, look, come visit us and look at these sustainability practices. And I'll give you just one called Copenpay. For a variety of attractions in the city of Copenhagen, the capital, if you prove you have done something sustainable during your stay, you'll get a discount. For example, if you walk or if you ride your bike to the National Museum, your entrance has a discount fee. And that's a great marketing tool. I'll send you some videos that are really, really, really interesting. So, but again, my main point here is they're not being sustainable just because they think it is important. While they do, they are doing so because it has been legislated as such. And so again, I'm wondering if it might be worth looking into.
Sure. And like, I totally get what you're saying, and I agree with you. I just wonder how you would do this in a Vietnam context, because
Well,
I'd argue how enforcement is the issue, right? Like you can have all of the laws in the world that you want, but if you're not going to enforce them, they become sort of redundant.
You know what? Vietnam has actually been a pioneer. I may be dating myself here, Mark. You're a much younger man than I am. But Vietnam has actually been pioneer in piloting some of these schemes. So back in the 1980s, 1984, 1985, Vietnam received a very hefty grant from UNESCO to pilot Hoi An as a sustainable tourism destination. And what they've done is they've calculated what the capacity of the destination was. And they've put those little gates, and you had to buy a ticket. And there was a limited number of people that could enter Hoi An at a given time on a given day. It's very, very successful for 10 years until there was the next economic crisis, and people, okay, we need to open up this so that more people can have jobs. But for a case like Vietnam, you probably would not be successful if you were to do sort of a blanket legislation and enforcement. It wouldn't work. It's been tried before many, many times. What might work is to select one or two key destinations and implement it there. Wait a couple of years, verify and document its success, and then move from there to other destinations. It did work in the past, briefly. And so, yeah.
The other issue I would raise is there the will to do that. I look
Yes.
at Ha Long Bay, for example. When I first got to
Oh
Vietnam
my
in
gosh. Yeah,
2019,
absolutely.
it was a mess. And that's
I'm not sure what, yes, I completely agree. I'm not sure what it will take, but
yeah,
and I'm not sure if civil society in general understands that these resources, they are finite, right? There comes a point
sure,
when it tilts, right? Uh, any tourism attraction, any tourism destination has a breaking point, right? Ha Long Bay is the perfect case where we are almost there at the point where the damage might be irreversible, right? If you were to do like Thailand did, where they closed Koh Phi Phi Island for tourists for, I think it was a year, uh, give or take, it may take some draconian measures to recover that. Now, for that to happen, that there needs to be an immense educational effort, not just at the government and civil society level, but on the visitor level as well, right?
mm,
So you have these sort of three vectors that you sort of have to sensitize to look. Vietnam has these amazing, incredible resources they don't have anywhere else in the world, right? But they really need to be protected, and that means enforcement of capacity issues. So you would have civil society, you'd have government, and you'd have visitors. That's really hard to do. It's a big country, 118 million people, very complex, as you know. So yeah,
then I wonder what you think about the tourism target numbers that come out every year. I'm talking about not what they achieve, what they aim to achieve. I know
yeah,
this year it's 25 million after 21 last year.
yeah.
This is a big, you're talking
I
about, what's that, 10-15% increase in tourist numbers.
I can kind of see the purpose of it as sort of a motivational tool, right? But what I would
Sure.
love to see is to have those numbers beautifully distributed geographically so they do not cause excessive impact on a single or a handful of destinations. And also, I would love to see a few carrying capacity studies so that we get to a point where we have a definite number or at least an approximation. Okay, how many tourists, be it international or domestic, and I'm assuming you're referring those 21 million, these are international tourists, right?
Yeah.
Now, okay, we need to always add the domestic tourists. And so we are
Sure.
getting very, very close to the 300 million trips in a year. That should give us pause. So the rule of thumb is whenever the number of tourist trips is the same or higher than the number of local inhabitants, and Vietnam has 118, 117, 120 million inhabitants, that's when folks like me and tourist managers in the MO urge caution. Say, hey, do we really need these many? Uh, can we sort of put a moratorium on this? Can we look more closely? And again, can we look very closely at the domestic market? Um, it's understandable that Vietnam wants to sort of bet in the international market because they spend more, right? If Vietnam is going to transition from an emerging destination to a more mature one, typically the metrics go from growth to value, much like Denmark has done in the past. But again, I have to confess, I haven't really seen any major studies at the national level to look at the answer to the question, how many tourists are enough? Um, you have a few scholars, I think a few folks in the industry who are already calling attention to places such as you mentioned, Ha Long Bay, Hoi An, even Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang and Nha Trang, who are asking for yes, let's develop it, but let's do so sustainably. But again, I haven't seen any actual figures for how many. If that makes sense.
Sure. So let me ask you this. If you could do just one thing, right? You were there for 6 years in Vietnam
Yes.
working in the tourism
Yes.
industry. You could
Yes.
do just one thing to
Oh
sort
my
of get
gosh.
it on track. What would you do?
Other than support my students, because I would not be worth my salt as an educator if I didn't say that. Other than support my students in being as fulfilled in their careers and personal lives as they could be, I think I would grab the average person by the lapels and I would shake them to an extent that I would understand how important tourism really is for Vietnam's economy and society at large. I don't think the average person understands what an immense force tourism is, not just economically, but socially and culturally as well. It is, again, the world's largest industry. I think Vietnam's tourism contribution to its GDP is massively underestimated. You can read the reports of the World Bank and the IMF, United Nations World Tourism Organization, in very, very small letters at the very end. All of them agree that these numbers are likely an underestimation of the value of tourism activities towards Vietnam's GDP. And again, I don't think your average person understands this, right? That, for example, if I'm going to the beach and I leave a plastic bag there instead of recycling it, I'm causing Vietnam a huge disservice, not just economically, but socially and culturally. So I think that'd be my number one thing.
Sure.
I would do my best to convince and educate your average person of the importance of tourism for Vietnam. Again, not just economically, but socially and culturally as well.
Sure. Cool. Okay, man. Did you have anything else you wanted to
No, that's
throw
it.
in
It
there?
was nice talking to you, man. It was nice seeing you.